the NBA has finally changed their Hack-a-Shaq rule. This is something that has been heavily debated the last few seasons, and they always said they were going to change something, but they never did. But this year, for next season, the new rule is in, and here's what's changed. The rule used to be that in the fourth quarter, the last 2 minutes, you couldn't hack a Shaq. If you hacked somebody or fouled somebody off the ball in the last 2 minutes, they would shoot a free throw, and then their team would take the ball out of bounds. So it was basically like a technical foul. So now what they've done is they've extended this into every quarter in the game. So now in the first quarter, in the second quarter, and in the third quarter, the last 2 minutes, you cannot foul somebody off the ball and make them shoot 2 free throws. A very common strategy at the end of the first 3 quarters was to hack a Shaq and get a 2-for-1 situation. When you're under a minute and you're trying to get that 2-for-1, now you won't be able to do that in quarters 1, 2, and 3 because it's going to be just like the fourth quarter. But you can still hack a Shaq at the 5-minute mark or the 4-minute mark or the 3-minute mark. A lot of the teams, that's what they would do as the quarter was coming to an end. And even in the fourth quarter, they would hack a Shaq and mess up the rhythm. They would start doing that at like the 6 or 5-minute mark of the game. Now, for those of you that don't know what the Hack-a-Shaq strategy is, Shaquille O'Neal was one of the most dominant players ever in NBA history. He was so dominant, in fact, that teams came up with this strategy of just fouling him and putting him on the free throw line so that they wouldn't have to deal with him in the paint, because he was so dominant that if he caught the ball in the paint, it was almost always a dunk or a layup. It was like a guaranteed 2 points. But Shaq was a bad free throw shooter. So teams started fouling him and said, you know, it's better if he goes to the line. He might miss 2 free throws. Most of the time, he's going to miss at least 1 free throw. And in the NBA today, there's a lot of players that are just like Shaq. They're not as dominant in the paint, but they're not good free throw shooters. So the strategy has evolved. It's even worse because now people are fouling before players get the ball. They're fouling intentionally to make sure that the team doesn't even get a chance to shoot. They just go straight to the free throw line. It slows the game down. It takes teams out of their rhythm. And you've seen it happen like crazy. In fact, last season, there were more Hack-a-Shaq type fouls than any other season ever. The numbers went way up. It was like 479 intentional Hack-a-Shaq fouls in a regular season. That's up from 179 the season before. So you can see that it was something that was on the rise. And the NBA, they just don't want to see it anymore. So that's why they're changing the rule. The NBA also added 2 more Hack-a-Shaq rules. The first one has to do with fouling before the ball is even inbounded. Now, if you foul a player before the ball is inbounded, it's like a technical foul. You're going to get to shoot 1 free throw, and then that team is going to get the ball back out of bounds. They added in this rule because a lot of people were actually fouling before teams could even inbound the ball. Let's say they score. Let's say they go down, they get a layup or a 3-point basket or whatever, they score. The other team is inbounding. Before they can inbound and even run a play or even thinking about running a play or scoring, they just immediately hack the player that they want to shoot free throws. So whether this is off a made basket or maybe the ball goes out of bounds, the team wouldn't even have a chance to catch and shoot or anything because they would just foul immediately. They didn't even want to take the risk. And this is hilarious because if you've been watching basketball, you've seen this happen. I remember when Ben Wallace was on the Pistons, and even when he went to the Chicago Bulls, teams were fouling him. He was trying to run away. I know you guys remember. There's got to be people that are listening right now. You remember in the playoffs, in games, Ben Wallace was trying to run away from the other team so he could not get fouled. And it was hilarious. And so now you won't be able to do that. You have to allow the team to inbound the ball before you can even attempt. Otherwise, it's like a technical. And they're going to shoot a free throw and get the ball back. The third rule that they added is they made it a flagrant foul to jump on a player's back to intentionally foul. Now, you're probably asking, why would anybody jump on somebody's back when they're trying to hack a Shaq or hack a player? And that's because a lot of times the referees don't see the fouls because they're not looking off the ball for fouls. So in order for them to see it, sometimes you have to have a reaction. You have to really foul the guy, and they're worried about players getting injured. They don't want you jumping on somebody's back. It's mainly because of this foul that Noel got on the 76ers. Nerlens Noel, he jumped on somebody's back and it was a risk. So they're just trying to prevent injury. So that's why they said if you do that, that's actually going to be a flagrant foul. So you're no longer able to foul in that manner when you're trying to get the referee's attention. In my opinion, I completely agree with the flagrant foul and even the foul before the ball is inbounded. But I don't understand what the big deal is with the Hack-a-Shaq. If you can't make a free throw, that's your fault. Go in the gym and practice your free throw. Free throws are not difficult at all. All you have to do is put the work in, practice, and then in the game, you just have to be focused and not nervous and choke. Don't think about other things. Just be focused. Take your time and make your free throws. If you make your free throws, nobody's going to hack a Shaq. If you start making them, they'll stop doing it. Now, I remember in one playoff series, I think it was the Spurs versus the Clippers. The Spurs were hacking a Shaq. They were hacking a DeAndre Jordan. And the game was delayed. You guys remember that? Because that was a West Coast game, and the game was severely delayed. It lasted way longer than it should have because of all the fouls, all the stoppages in time. And on the East Coast, it was like 1 a.m. The game didn't finish until like 1 or 2 a.m. because of the fouls. So I understand in that situation why, you know, they really want to clean this up. But that's the Clippers' fault. Doc Rivers should have just taken him out of the game. If he can't make free throws, that's his bad. He needs to practice. He needs to do the free throw drill. When I was in high school, we hated the free throw drill. Both the varsity and the junior varsity would have to shoot free throws. You have to shoot 2. So that's 30 players or so. And this is the way it works. If you make both free throws for your player, for your turn, nobody has to do any running. If you miss one and make one, then you have to run a suicide, which is where you run to the free throw line, you touch it, you come back to the baseline, then you go to the half court line, you come back, then you go to the other free throw line and come back. And the entire team had to do that under 30 seconds. If you didn't do it under 30 seconds, even if one player missed it, then everybody had to line up and do it again. Now, if you missed both free throws, then you had to run a 16. That's when you run from sideline to sideline 16 times. And I think we had to do that under a minute. So this was a brutal drill. Nobody wanted to do this drill. You had to run through it with all 30 players on both varsity and JV. We only did this when we messed up in games. The coach would punish us with this brutal conditioning and running drill. But that's what they need to do in the NBA. If they do that, everybody will start making free throws. Everybody will shoot at least 70%. But today, reports are coming out that John Jones tested positive for estrogen blockers. So you're probably saying, what is an estrogen blocker? An estrogen blocker is something that athletes use to prevent side effects like man tits. Have you ever heard that term before? Man tits? So for